Today, we are understanding the properties of the sensory receptors. In this particular discussion, the contributions by John Mueller are very important, and he gave the idea of law of specific nerve energies. That was the Mueller's idea, or Mueller's law, one can say. Okay, with this brief note, we move on. What is sensory receptor? Sensory receptor is a modified part of a neuron or a specialized structure that detects the stimulus and transduces stimulus to an electrical potential that is propagated along the nerve to the central nervous system in a coded manner for processing and interpretation purposes. I repeat again, specialized part of a neuron that detects the stimulus, transduces it, propagates the information in a coded manner to the central nervous system for processing and interpretation. Receptor, again, another small definition, is a part of the neuron that detects, transduces, and encodes the signal and transmits it to the central nervous system. I think the second part is, this is a good one. Now it performs, the receptor performs 5 basic functions. 1, the reception, that is detection. Then amplification or attenuation. And then it transduces because the one form of energy to the electrical energy, it will change. So that is a transduction, and then it encodes. That means it gives the codification of the electrical signals and transmits them along the nerve fibers. These are the classification of the receptors. They are classified according to the location of the stimulus, whether they are located distantly, telereceptors, internally, interoreceptors, externally on the body surface, exteroreceptors, or within the muscles, or positioning, or trying to detect the position of the muscle and joints, the proprioceptors. Or they are also classified according to the nature of the stimulus. That is the physical nature of the stimulus, whether they are mechanical, thermal, or noxious, electromagnetic, or chemical. Then they are also classified, the receptors are also classified according to their adaptation property, either rapidly adapting, slowly adapting, non-adapting. They are also classified according to the activity pattern, whether they are continuous or they are only active for a short period of time, the tonic and phasic. I discuss the properties in the following 6 headings. The specificity of the receptors, then representation in the cerebral cortex in a defined area, and generation of the impulse, that is one of the property of the receptor. Then another property is a sensory unit and the recruitment of the units. Then we have a lateral inhibition to focus the receptor activity, and finally the receptors encode the information, that is sensory coding. With the first one, the specificity, it is discussed in 5 headings. 1, the first of these things, Bell-Magendie's law. That is, this law states that the anterior root or ventral root in the spinal cord carries the motor signals, and the posterior root or the dorsal root in the spinal cord carry the sensory information. This is what the Bell-Magendie described. Bell-Magendie law states that the anterior root carry the motor signals, the posterior root carry the sensory information. Then we have a Mueller's law, the B I will take up in the next slide. It is the law of specific nerve energies. Then the labeled lines is the law of projection. Then unimodal and polymodal stimulation and adequate stimulus. That means the specificity have a 5 different characters. One is already defined. Going back, what is Mueller's law? You saw the picture of the Mueller in the title page. The speed of conduction and other characteristics of sensory nerve fibers vary, but the action potentials are in the nerve fibers are similar. They are having the 100 millivolt amplitude and activated at a particular threshold, and they produce the reversal potentials and so on and so forth. These action potentials are similar. These action potentials have the same property. So then how the nerve and the brain detects that? Because in the brain what it receives is the information in action potential. The action potential reach the brain. Though the action potential relayed in 3 different locations, that means at a first order neuron to second order neuron synapse, second order neurons, that is from the spinal cord to thalamus, and in the thalamic relay, and then to the cortical relay. At each stage, it is action potential. Now, how this action potential is codified? It raises a question, why stimulation of a touch receptor? You just say that a touch receptor, you will only detect a touch, you will not detect pain. You will not detect pain, or you will not detect a thermal sensation. So that means if there is what is called a specialized line of transmission from the receptor to the end, that is the doctrine. So Mueller mentioned, he said that it is the law of specific nerve energies. So that means he mentioned that a specific nerve energies travel through a labeled lines, and these labeled lines reach to the labeled targets in the cerebral cortex, and they would detect the particular type of sensations. That visual is visual, auditory is auditory, touch is touch, thermal is thermal, pain is pain, something like that. In continuation of the Mueller's law of projection, or projection through a labeled line. A particular type of receptor is carried by a set of nerve fibers that are specifically meant for it and relay specific location at various levels, maybe in the spinal cord, in the thalamus, and in the cortex. The stimulation of the receptor from the point, that means the receptor level or its fiber anywhere in the destination, will produce the sensation of what it is carrying. Say, for example, if it is carrying a touch, it will produce a touch sensation. Even if you stimulate, or if you stimulate in the cerebral cortex, the person will say that it is a touch. For example, touch receptor carried by fibers involve 3 set of neurons. I already mentioned about it. Threshold stimulation of these receptors or fibers anywhere in the path will produce touch only. It will not produce any other sensation. No matter where the particular sensory pathway is stimulated along its course to the cortex, the sensation felt will indicate the location of the receptor. Say, for example, if I stimulate in the thalamus a particular neuron which is carrying from the finger, from the thumb of the hand, left thumb, so then the stimulation of those receptors, those fibers in the thalamus will always tell that this thumb, they stimulate the receptors in the thumb. So that means there is a location of the receptor is defined. That is the another projection. That means at each level, in the spinal cord, in the thalamus, in the cortex, there is a localization of the particular area on the body surface. So this is detected because we know this information during neurosurgical procedures on conscious patients. When a cortical receiving area for impulses of the left hand is stimulated, the patient reports the sensation of the left hand, not any other area. So that means there are specified areas in the brain or cerebral cortex. When you stimulate that, he will say that that particular area, he says that this is coming from left hand, right hand, leg, so on. Then another important feature is the persons who have undergone the amputation. Amputation means removal of the limb because of the accident or because of some medical reasons. Then this person, later dates, he develops a pain in the foot. But you have amputated the limb, but he feels the pain in the foot. So this type of a sensation or this type of a feeling is known as a phantom limb. So that means the limb is not existing. Limb is not existing. Limb has already been removed, but he feels pain in the foot of the whatever the amputated limb of the amputated side. So that means there are areas in the thalamus. So those areas are getting activated or excited to produce that pain, but those areas still remain. They are dedicated for the foot. So that is the phantom limb. So I have given one more word here, the phantom limb. You look into it. So then another aspect of the receptor is usually a receptor detects the signal from a particular modality of sensation. Say, for example, mechanoreceptors. The mechanoreceptors, only one type of a mechanical stimuli would produce or activate the receptors. And that too, the one type that is a threshold stimulation. Don't say that if it is a very intense stimulation can activate anything. So that means a threshold stimulation of a particular stimulus. From a particular stimulus would produce the response. That is the single modality, a particular, say for example, thermal sensation. The heats, there are warmth, receptor for warmth, receptor for cold. Suppose a warm receptor, their warm receptors, when you touch the warmth, they are only activated with a threshold. And if it will not produce the sensation of pressure, sound, or any other thing. So that means this is called unimodal. So that is a single stimulus, single receptor, and the labeled line. So that is unimodal. However, this is not true in case of the pain. In case of the pain, say for example, in the abdomen, we have the spasmodic pain when the intestine getting stretched because of the inflammation or the obstruction, it is getting stretched. So that is mechanical. And because of the inflammation, there is at the same time when it is stretched, there are inflammatory chemicals released. So that means that is also stimulating the pain sensation or pain nerves. And because of the inflammation, there is increase in temperature. That is the thermal. So now there are three modes: the mechanical, thermal, chemical. All things are coming in the pain. So that means a pain sensation is not a unimodal, it is a polymodal. So that means there are number of stimuli would act on the pain nociceptors, would be able to detect. In case of a touch receptor, it is only mechanical distortion or mechanical change. In case of pain, it is polymodal. It may be mechanical, it may be thermal, or it may be chemical, or their combinations, whatever. Even in the chemicals, there are a number of chemicals which would produce the pain. So there may be a cocktail mixture of these chemicals. Say, for example, we have a histamine here, the inflammatory mediators or inflammatory chemicals contain histamine prostaglandins, serotonin, kinins, and the cell injury products, the potassium. These are cell injury products, the potassium, hydrogen ion, ADP, and many more. And all these things, yeah, I have just listed very few of them. So all of them would, in combination or in permutation, stimulate the nociceptors. So that means nociceptors are polymodal. Thus, they are called polymodal receptors. I have now given the receptors are specified for a particular mode of activation, or it can be activated by multiple modes. Then what is adequate stimulus? That means each receptor requires to be stimulated by adequate stimulus. So then only it detects. So that adequate stimulus, that the minimum stimulus is a threshold level. Below that, it will not produce any response. So similarly, you have, say for example, in the daytime, all the rods are stimulated. The cones require a very high strength of light, high intensity of light, whereas the rods require a very low intensity of light that they work in the night itself. That is the twilight region. So for example, rods can detect a very, very low sensitivity of the light, or a light touch. So you can have a wisp of cotton touching it. So that will detect the fine touch. So that means there is what is called, even to detect that fine touch, we need to have a threshold. You can just try this thing with you. Firm pressing of the squeezing of the closed eye. You can try that. You just what I'm doing here, you just press, give a pressure here with a finger, just on the eye. And if you have done it, you will feel that there is a ring of lights appear. You have to press it little firmly, so you will get the ring of light, the flash of lights appear, especially the rings. These are called phosphine rings. So now what you are doing, you are giving a physical squeeze, and this physical squeeze at a high threshold, that means when you are doing the high threshold, that may be stimulating the cones, and this stimulation of the cones will result in light only. Cones cannot result in a touch. So and if you are going beyond this level, it will produce the pain. So that means you will find phosphine rings when you touch your eyeball, and if you press it too much or too much intensity of light is given, so then it will produce pain. Same thing happens with a loud sound or a sharp beam of light or a deep pressure that produces pain. So that means suprathreshold intensity. So that means we have adequate stimulus. Adequate stimulus is that stimulus that would be minimal. At a minimal level, it will produce or detect the change in response. Suppose if it is very high, then it will be different. Usually, a particular thing will produce a one type of sensation only. That's what we observed here in phosphine rings. Now, there are defined areas in the cortex. What are these defined areas? So that means this defined area, that means each sensation, that means the somesthetic sensation, the visual sensation, auditory sensation, and the olfactory sensation. And all these sensations have a localized areas in the brain. So this is called what is called law of projection. So, but the visceral sensations do not have the specificity. They don't have the representation. However, they share it with the somesthetic sensations in the dermatolocation. So therefore, stimulation of a cortical areas during neurosurgical procedures. Say for example, if somebody stimulates the occipital area, the person sees the light. Now, coming back here, these are the sensory areas of the cerebral cortex. This is cerebral cortex. Okay, one lateral part of the hemisphere. So this is frontal. This is frontal area. This is frontal lobe. This is occipital. The green is occipital. Now this is central sulcus. This line is a central sulcus, and this is a lateral sulcus. Okay, so now this central sulcus, the posterior to the central sulcus, this area, this blue area is the somatosensory cortex. So this is in the parietal lobe. This is a frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, a temporal lobe. So now in this parietal area, just posterior to the central sulcus is the somatosensory cortex. This receives information from the entire body. This green area, the visual cortex, where it receives the input from the visual, that is the eye. This blue area or violet area is the auditory cortex, which is located in the temporal cortex. This is temporal cortex. This is located in the temporal cortex. This is auditory cortex. So this yellowish area here, this is the olfactory cortex. The olfactory cortex, that means olfactory nerve comes here, relays at one place, then it will enter into the olfactory cortex. So this is the olfactory. And this red area is for, because it shares with the somatosensory cortex, which is supplying the tongue, almost supplying the tongue. This is a gustatory or a taste gustatory cortex. And a part of this this part is dedicated to the vestibular, that means equilibrium. Whatever represented here is for the conscious sensation, conscious vestibular sensation. So there are subconscious vestibular sensations which do not reach the cerebral cortex. They will be done with the help of a cerebellum. This is cerebellum. They will do it the cerebellum. So thus, what I defined, the sensory areas of the cerebral cortex are distributed in the particular areas. So somesthetic sensation in the parietal cortex, the postcentral gyrus, then occipital, the visual cortex, then this is olfactory cortex, the tip of the anterior part of the temporal cortex, then the auditory cortex is the temporal cortex, and the specialized area in the parietal cortex is gustatory, and the specialized area is for the conscious vestibular sensations. Now, coming back, how the impulse is generated or initiated. So that means the impulse is generated something like what the generation of the impulse is changing from a mechanical transformation to a electrical transformation. So that produces a depolarization wave. And this depolarization wave, so just like this here, I have taken up. This is one of the receptors here, Pacinian corpuscle, and this is the nerve, and this is the central core of the axon, and this is hooked onto the through the electrodes. It is hooked here, and it is the amplifier, and it is a display system. Display system may be cathode ray oscilloscope, or it may be a computer, nowadays computer. Now, whenever you, because this Pacinian corpus, this is a receptor, this Pacinian corpuscle, whenever you put a force on it, it gets deformed. This is a connective tissue layer, the lamella. So it gets deformed. The deformity is detected by the central core, and this detection is like this, a wave of depolarization. You see that D. This is A. This is A. You can just see small wave of depolarization produced. As I increase the force, the wave of the amplitude of the wave of depolarization increases. So see, as you see in B. And I have increased it further. Maybe I just say that 1 gram, 10 gram, 20 grams C. So that means you have a greater amplitude of the wave of depolarization. And then even you increase further, it would increase the depolarization wave to greater level. Now, these waves of depolarization, A, B, C, D, these are the depolarization waves, and these depolarization waves have an amplitude and they have a decay. They have a decay here. They decay in relation to time, in relation to the space on the receptor. So that means they have a temporal and the spatial decay of these waves. These are called receptor potentials or generator potentials. Now, once the D is the generator potential, which has already reached this threshold line. This is the threshold line. When it crosses the threshold line, it opens up the voltage gated sodium channels and fires an action potential. So E is an action potential. So that means when it reaches the wave of depolarization reaches the threshold level, it fires an action potential. Okay. So now, suppose if I have pressed it very hard, suppose if I have produced this thing, what happens? This wave of depolarization keeps on increasing and it will be for a longer duration of time. It will not be as immediately because you are still pressurizing, and again it dies off, or this thing. So that generator potential is the depolarizing wave, as you see here, similar to electrotonic potentials or excitatory postsynaptic potentials occurring at the synapse, postsynaptic membrane of the synapse. In this, the recording of the potential is made in the second node of Ranvier. This is second node of Ranvier. The increasing the intensity of the stimulation increases the amplitude of depolarization. You can just see that A, B, C, D. So depolarization at a threshold level opens the sodium channels and produces an action potential. That is, as happens in case of A. This is the beginning of the generator potential. Now we take it further. These are some of the experiments done by Lowenstein, and he wanted to study what happens, how this depolarization wave. So I will just narrate. So now this is the first part I have already described. The second part, what Lowenstein did, Lowenstein peeled off this lamellae, these lamellae, Pacinian corpuscle lamellae, these are connected to lamellae. Okay, when he peeled off the lamellae and he applied the pressure again here on the nerve, the open axon, he applied the pressure here. But when you stripped the Pacinian corpuscle and recorded as you have done here with the recording system at the second node of Ranvier, and you still get these the generator potentials and the action potential. That is number B. But however, these potentials may not be as sharp as this. They may be more prolonged because the viscoelastic element or the elastic tissue is lost. So that, but still then they will produce the action potential. Now, in this third component, in the third experiments of the Lowenstein, where what he continued with these stripped receptors, and he just applied local anesthetic or opiates or a pressure here in this particular segment, the way the arrow is indicated. Okay. When he applied the local anesthetic, what he found the generator potential persisted. And these are generator, the wave of depolarizations, the waves of depolarization A, B, C, D, as you see them there. So they are present. However, it would not produce the action potential because these local anesthetics, they will block the sodium channels. That is why the voltage gated sodium channels are blocked and the action potential does not result. You don't see the action potential. Then he did another experiments. The Lowenstein did another experiments. He cut the central end of the nerve. So that means distal towards the spinal cord. When he cut the nerve and allowed it to degenerate. So now this is what I am showing here as a degeneration. When he allowed it to degeneration, after some days, he repeated the experiments and he found no generator potential, no action potential. So he wanted to say that this lamella of the Pacinian corpuscles may not be necessary for producing the action potential. Okay, so now this is being propagated here. That is the second part of the result of these Lowenstein's experiments. However, for precision, for accuracy, for the perfectness, so you require the Piscinian corpuscle. Now, I'm just trying to give you a table stating the differences between the generator potential and action potential. So now the parameter, the generator potential and action potential. The latency, so there is no delay from the point of when you put the pressure, immediately the wave of depolarization begins. That means there is no latency. Whereas in action potential, there is a latency. It is present. If you increase the strength of stimulation, you saw that ABCD that produces the graded response. That means the increasing amplitude. Whereas in case of action potential, you cannot see such thing because the action potential is a all or none response. All or none response. So that means increasing the strength does not increase the amplitude of the action potential. Then threshold. There is no threshold for generator potential. So that means even with a minimal, also small wave of depolarization seen, with as you increase the waves of the amplitude of the wave increases. Whereas threshold is present in the action potential. So that means there is a critical level at which the sodium channels, voltage gated sodium channels open up. Then decay of the generator potential. They decay temporally and spatially. That means in relation to time, in relation to space on the receptors. Whereas in case of action potential, it's a fixed, hyperpolarization is a fixed event. The hyperpolarization is decided by the potassium. And this fixed event, and during this time, it will not be responsive. So that means there is no decay. Then the refractory period is absent here in generator potential. It is present in the action potential. So that means because of the refractory period, you cannot stimulate again and again and again. Then temporal and spatial summation. We can add the potentials or the depolarization in case of a generator potential. We cannot add, it is all or none response. Local anesthetics do not abolish the generator potential, as I have shown. The local anesthetics abolish the action potential. Degeneration abolishes both of them, because when there is a nerve is dead, nothing is going to remain. The ionic fluxes, it is a passive sodium movement. The generator potential is because the potassium cation movement or sodium movement. Whereas the action potential, it is the active sodium or calcium movement. So these are the differences in the generator potential and action potential. Same type of table I had given you between the EPSP and action potential. So you can just replace this generator potential by EPSP, though that makes the difference between the EPSP and action potential. Okay, now what is sensory unit? We have seen a motor unit. To recap, a motor unit is the muscle fiber supplied by a single motor axon, single axon or alpha motor neuron. That means this motor unit comprises of the alpha motor neuron, the axon of the alpha motor neuron, and the fibers supplied by it, whatever the number of fibers. Similarly, the sensory unit is also a sensory nerve or a neuron, supplies a set of receptors in the skin. And these set of receptors they are carried by a single axon. This is called a sensory unit. Sensory units are distributed in a mosaic pattern. So they are not one just placed in a same place. No, they are in the mosaic pattern. So because the fibers will be ramifying on either directions. The receptor location on the skin can be mapped in the cortex. We can map these sensory receptors by stimulating the cerebral cortex, somatosensory area. So one interesting thing, suppose if you place two electrodes or two stimuli on one unit, you will detect it as one. Say for example, here is the location, and then this is the sensory receptor, one receptor. So that means if you press here, you will detect it as one. Suppose if you stimulate two sensory units, so then it will detect as two. So that means the two means the two units have been recruited. Two units have been stimulated. And the minimum distance that discriminates the 2 points, that means the two sensory unit separation, is known as acuity or 2-point discrimination. So that is the ability to discriminate the two units as two units separately. This is the basis for a tactile acuity or a 2-point discrimination test. Similarly, we have a visual acuity. You must have gone to the ophthalmologist and optometrician, where they have taken the Snellen's chart, and you might have been asked to read those alphabets, and you see that those alphabets are designed in such a way that two particular set of rods or cones are stimulated. Two set of cones are stimulated, and the overall, so according to that, they will determine your visual acuity. So it is the two different set of cones, when they are stimulated, that would be visual acuity. Same thing, same sensory principle. Recruitment of units follows the spatial and temporal pattern. So that means these units are recruited spatially. Suppose if there is too much pressure here, so that already some of those unit fibers are activated, and they will be added up to the, they will send the extra impulses. So that means I have already mentioned, similar to the pattern of subliminal fringe. If the intensity of stimulation is greater, it will excite the surrounding receptors. Also the receptors, there is prolonged duration of generator. So that means when you stimulate with a greater intensity, the generator potential is having a longer duration. If the generator potential is having a longer duration and it is above that level of the firing, so it will keep on firing the action potentials. That is as far as the sensory units. Now, there is another important feature, the lateral inhibition. Lateral inhibition is one of the most important mechanisms that enable localization of the stimulus, very precise. That means that this helps us to localize the stimulus. So that means it gives a precision for the discrimination, that is acuity. Lateral inhibition is starts at a receptor level. And in the receptor level, what happens when you put a pressure here, there will be a bell-shaped intensity of the stimulation in the center is maximum. As it is coming away to the periphery, it is lesser and lesser. Hence, the receptors at the periphery are less excited, or they may be excited subliminally. Those outside the receptive zones are not at all excited. So that is what this is how it happens in the, I will explain in the next graph. In the central nervous system, the primary afferents, rather than talking about this thing, I will come back and read this thing. Let us see, for example, here. This is the skin. Okay. Now I have just put the pressure with this pointed pencil I have shown. That this is the skin which is being pressed. Otherwise, it is a normal intact skin. Dashed line is a normal intact skin. When I have put the pressure here, what happens? This is the central area. This whole area here to here is the receptive area. Now, when the pressure here, it would produce the maximal response. As you are going away from this, you just going away from this, the number of the stimulation or the receptors or activation diminishes. diminishes in the same pattern. It is the bell shape. So that means if I were to tell this is maximal here and it decays in the similar bell shaped manner. So both sides. So now let us see what happens. This one in this pencil tip, when it is stimulated here, the receptor here, maybe any of those tactile receptors, say for example Pacinian corpuscles, this is excited. The excitement of these things, see the number of discharges here, it's 20. So that means I have counted the number of discharges. It may be arbitrary for giving you the idea. So it produces a good number of discharges. And these discharges, now as it comes here, it is the synapse in the spinal cord. And this will be stimulating this receptor, this synapse here, and these are the projecting neurons. Now what happens? At the same time, this particular primary afferent, this is a primary afferent, it will stimulate the interneuron here in the spinal cord. I'm talking about spinal cord or central nervous system. It stimulates the interneuron. This interneuron is the inhibitory interneuron. What it does, it will excite these inhibitory interneuron, and this excitation of the inhibitory interneuron inhibits the neighboring or adjacent these projecting neurons. So that means this neuron and this neuron are inhibited. So now what happened? So now this would be inhibited. That's one part. Okay, so that may result in the impulse transmission from this would be diminished. Further, you see another aspect. That means there were these particular receptors are located on the edge. Both of them are situated on the edge. Both will have a number of discharges 4. So when they are 4 here, and when they get inhibited, the 4 has been reduced to 1. So that means there will be only a minimal stimulus. Whereas if you see here, it is 20 here, and say for example these red interneurons, because these also would stimulate. So you see, for example, when this impulse is coming here, this would stimulate these red neurons. However, the stimulation of the red neurons is lesser than the stimulation of the these violet neurons. So these inhibitory neurons which are going to the adjacent. So because there are only 4 impulses are coming, 4 impulses stimulate these, and they will inhibit this. So ultimately, the number of impulses going through this the second order neuron would be diminished. It started with 20, it would be diminished. In contrast, the number of units have diminished it further. So this is where the central part is getting focused. So this is what the lateral inhibition. At the center of the receptive zone, maximum discharges are seen. This is maximum discharge. Periphery discharges decreases, as you see here. Beyond the receptive area, greater strength is required. Suppose if this is the receptive area from here and between the area, and if you are going here, this is a lax. It requires a greater strength. In the spinal cord, via an inhibitory interneuron, inhibits the adjacent neuron. See, for example, it inhibits the adjacent neuron. This case is true for the green or the blue afferent, whatever the afferent. So that means you can see that the blue one is talking to red one, the green one is talking to this inhibitory interneuron, and the adjacent neuron. That produces the contrast, because what happens that the central one becomes more focused, the lateral ones, they are diminished. So there is a focusing, and such type of thing is seen in the visual retina. So on centers, off centers, so that we will have the image formed precise and we can identify. Same thing happens here also, lateral inhibition. So that means whatever is going, this is going with a precision. We see it further. Say for example, I read these things. In the central nervous system, the primary efferents excite the inhibitory interneuron. Thus, the discharge of the peripheral neurons diminishes or absent, while the center one remain activated. Now you can be clear. Thus, lateral inhibition enhances the contrast between the center and the peripheral stimulation areas to increase the ability of the brain to localize the sensory input. Now, I will take this thing, same for example, another example here. It is a pin here. This is the skin area, and the center point this is the tip of the pin there. So you can just see that this B is activated. So it has produces so many inputs here. You can just see that number of discharges or number of activation is greater to this another neuron here in the spinal cord. Same thing happens here. This will produce inhibition here. This will produce inhibition here. It's not shown. And by inhibiting, and already these are stimulated less. So overall, the number of activity is less. It's only 5 here. You can just see here, it's only 5. At the subsequent levels, maybe at the thalamus, what happens? This 5 will be trying to reach there, but these are again inhibited by this the focused line going up. So that means this would inhibit these things, and still you get the clear only this part, the central core part is going up, and the activation of B will be producing the effect in the cerebral cortex B, and the other things are not activated. So that will produce the focus or a clarity or a contrast, because when there is a black, when there is a white and black, black becomes blacker, white becomes whiter. It is something like that. It produces the contrast. That's about the lateral inhibition. But the lateral inhibition is a process which has begun here, because when there is a central that means on the skin, when there is a stimulus, this stimulus activates the central area, and the peripheral area is less activated, and that particular thing has been used again in the central level, in the spinal cord or in thalamus or in the cortical level. That's further being guarded. Now this is the basis for a 2-point discrimination. 2-point discrimination test is the test performed by this calipers. You can see that the calipers is there, and you detect it's the tip of the tongue. So here on the tip of the tongue, the receptors are located very closely. The sensory units are located very closely, and you can see that the minimum distance required is 1.1 millimeter. Whereas on the tip of the finger, you can just see that it is between 3 to 8 millimeters, maybe 3 millimeter here, and here if you see on the dorsal side, of the finger, so that is much greater. So that means on the ventral side, it is more units are distributed. On the dorsal side, less units are distributed. Again, a lot of developmental aspects, because we explore our entire universe. The use of tools and exploration is through the flexor side or the ventral side, and then that is why more receptors are expressed on these particular areas. So the units, more units. And if you just see here on the back of the back skin, you can just see that 30 to 80 millimeters. So that means when you detect these 2 points here, you have to separate it in such a way that 3 to 8 centimeters you have to separate. Then only he detects it as a 2. Otherwise, he detects as 1. Here, 8 you have to separate by 3 to 8 millimeters, so that he will detect these 2 points as 2 points. Here, even a small distance, he will be detecting as 2 points, say for 3 millimeters. Here, it is only 1 millimeter. So now the minimum distance that will be able to detect 2 points as 2 points is known as tactile acuity or 2-point discrimination. Acuity. The magnitude of the 2-point discrimination threshold varies with place to place. I have said the tongue, the tip of the finger, on the back of the finger, on the back of on the back. The smallest where there are numerous receptors, more receptors. The distance is smaller where there are more receptors. The greater where receptor population is sparse, as happens here. The smallest on the fingertips, the flexor side of the arm, the distance is more on the dorsal side and the back. The sensation is carried, this particular 2-point discrimination is carried by the dorsal column pathway and involve cerebral cortex. Because if I were to say that I am detecting 2 points, so that means I have to synthesize. I have to say that yes, I am feeling 2. So there is a synthesis, and these are also called synthetic sensations. Okay, now move on. Sensory coding. How the action potentials are coded. The action potentials are all or none responses. You just see that action potentials are all or none responses, and how the brain detects the action potentials. See, for example, it's touch, it's pain, it's more, it is less, it is good, it's bad, or something like that. So now there is this coding is done by the temporal and spatial frequency modulation. The number of discharges, so one after another coming, whether they are coming in a burst or in a particular pattern, so that would determine the coding. The patterns, again, they will develop some patterns of discharge of action potential. So that is frequency code. So that means if there is more frequency, it's coming in a burst of activity and then stopping, another burst is coming, the burst and burst and burst or something like that. There will be 2 or 3, there are many permutations which could be possible. So that pattern of discharge of action potential that determines the coding. One is temporal and spatial frequency modulation, and the patterns of discharges, and again the patterns of discharges which have a temporal and a spatial pattern, and but the strength of the intensity of the stimulus is conveyed by the increasing burst of activity, increasing frequency of firing. Say, for example, if they are finding at simple threshold level, if there are 10 units, 10 action potential are produced. If it is a greater pressure, 100, still greater, maybe 1000 may be produced. 1000 is not possible because the number of action potential in a nerve limited to the duration of the action potential. The normally duration of the nerve action potential is about 2 milliseconds. So that means in 1 second at the maximum, nerve can fire 500 action potentials. However, 500 is also not possible because there is what is called a absolute refractory period and what is called a relative refractory period. Yeah, so that means strength is conveyed by the increasing frequency. So then another thing, number of receptors added up, a population code, and the number of receptors which are stimulated, that would also tell about the particular modality of sensation. So that is the population code. So then there are adaptation receptors. So there are some receptors which are fast adapting receptors and slowly adapting receptors, and both of them in combinations or in permutations they are added up, and their duration and these things would also determine the coding. And there is a specialized line because these information, touch is carried by the touch fibers, the pain is carried by the pain fibers, the pressure is by the pressure fibers, thermal is by the thermal. So like that, there are labeled line, so that will be traveling. The sensory coding has 5 different attributes or 5 different properties. The potentials discharge reach the sensory cortex where they are decoded with the help of somatosensory association area. So because the action potential they reach in the sensory cortex, and once they reach the sensory cortex, it is the action potential. Now these action potentials are reached to the other association areas, the sensory association area, and hippocampus. Hippocampus stores the memory or keeps the memory. So both of them sit together. They analyze what this means. Then they give a meaning to the sensory modality. So this meaning is given into the modality, the attribute, the location, the intensity, and the duration of the response. These are the 5 attributes they give to the particular receptor activation. That is a part of the sensory coding. So now we will see the one by one, the modality. So I was just talking about, so here I will tell about a coding of the sensation and a discharge pattern is unique for a given receptor. Say for example, the Meissner's corpuscles. I have shown the Meissner corpuscle in the last class. So when it is stimulated and it will detect the touch, especially the texture component of the touch. When Meissner corpuscles are stimulated, there is a burst effectivity. You just see that burst effectivity and silence. This is rapidly adapting a receptor. Say for example, here you have put the pressure, indentation. In that there will be a burst effectivity followed by a continuous. This is slowly adapting receptors. This is slowly adapting. This is the burst effectivity. Then vibration, that means alternating. So this is so initial part it is being detected. You have the two burst, two coming up here and then slowly. So that means it is only a detection of the change. This is a very rapidly. So if you compare to these things, it is more rapid adaptation, rapidly adapting. Then raffining ending, so the stretch. So when you see it's continuously discharging at a particular rate, initially there was more, but it is maintained. So these are slowly adapting. So that means each of these receptors, if I am talking about a texture, indentation, the vibration, stretch, all these are the attributes of a touch. And these are detected by these particular receptors. And that would produce that means coding of the sensation discharge pattern unique for a given receptor. Modality is discussed in 5 patterns. The specific coding, as I have mentioned here, then location and surrounding area. Third is the intensity of the stimulation. Fourth is inflammation and alteration in the pathway. Let us see the modality. The coding by receptor, I have described it. Location. If you are looking at the location, receptors located, location also modifies. Suppose it is near the hairy area or a non-hairy area. The hairy areas, the hair cells provide a leverage and amplify the signal. So that means it is easily detected. Whereas non-hairy area, they require higher strength. Intensity of the stimulation. It involves the greater receptive area. So that means as you stimulate your pressure is more. So that means a greater area, receptive area is involved. And that would produce the response. And if it is too much, it may be nociceptive. Then inflammation. Say for example, if there is inflammation and some inflammation of the skin. So what happens? Around the receptor may result in altered sensation. So that means the altered sensation is the nociception, now hyperalgesia. Hyperalgesia is a condition in which there is an increased pain sensitivity. So the particular area becomes more painful. So surrounding area becomes painful. Sometimes what happens, this area is not at all, that means a painful area, the sensitivity of the pain is increased. Whereas there is an area which is not painful at all, because of the inflammation, the pain is seen. So that is called allodynia. Allodynia is a condition in which it produces a pain. Otherwise, this will not detect. This will detect only touch or other sensation. Okay, that's allodynia. Hyperalgesia is the increased sensitivity of the nociceptors. So then, as the modality is, as the impulse or the transmission proceeds to the center, what happens if there is a demyelination? So that means as the whatever touch is now as a paresthesia. So that means it is an altered sensation, which happens in case of a demyelinating diseases. So that means a tingling and a numbness and that's such a type of feeling. He feel vagueness. This altered sensation is a paresthesia. I have used 3 words here: hyperalgesia, allodynia, paresthesia. That is a part of the modality modification. Then second comes the attributes. Just imagine that the good touch, bad touch, you can very well understand. So for example, a touch of a friend or a touch of a mother or a touch of an enemy or a stranger can be recognized. We recognize. So though there is it is all a touch, but we identify it. So that is the attribute. So that means there are some subtle aspects in the receptors. So this is a psychophysical. It's almost psychophysical, detect and are processed in the brain and that give a meaning. Suppose your mother comes and touches you on the back and you feel relaxed, you feel happy in the sense there is a consolation for you. These psychosomatic aspects are synthesized in the brain. So that means you have the cingulate cortex and the prefrontal cortex which are coming into play here, and even including the limbic system, with the help of sensory association areas that gives the previous memory. Now, okay, this is one aspect of the attributes. So that means a good touch, bad touch, ugly touch. Now, we have another things. We identify the commonly used objects. Say, for example, key I identify it in a closed eye. This is a key. It's metallic because of the attributes. Or you give me a coin, 5 rupees coin, or a 1 rupee coin, or a 2 rupee coin, I can identify. And this is because even with a closed eye, this is because I know them. Previously stored memory is there. This would have this much approximation, weight, and other things. We can identify the coin if given in hand and give the denomination. This involves the touch, pressure, and other receptors, and processing at the cerebral cortex, because you should have the previously stored information in the somatosensory area. And this stored information is matched, and then you will say that it is a 5 rupee coin. Like this, all senses with the different attributes can be discriminated precisely. This is about the attributes. Then the location. Sensory unit or sensory receptors supplied by a single sensory fiber. Receptive field and spatial distribution in the sensory receptors. Now, I have already mentioned about lateral inhibition, the mechanism that combines the excitatory and inhibitory components, enhance the signal focusing. Now, what happens? Because they are located, these particular receptors are located in a particular area. Say, for example, if I mentioned about the phantom limb. In that case, the amputation. But in the thalamus, there is a stimulation of the toe or the great toe pain. So that is because those are stored or localized in the thalamus. So that is either in the thalamus or in the cortex, they produce the pain that is a phantom limb. That means, or he may have the sensation of the missing part. So that is what happens in cases. That means each of these sensory units are located in the brain. They are located in the brain, though they are present here in the periphery, they are represented in the brain. That is about the location. Then about the intensity of the stimulation, stimulus intensity and response relationship. Say, now I want to ask you, try to imagine yourself. Suppose I give in your hand a 100 gram weight. Then I add another 1 gram, make it 101 gram. Can you differentiate it? No, you cannot. Suppose I am just, if I were to discriminate 100 gram, I need another constant change in weightage. So that means I should be able to detect it more precisely if I get a heavier weight, maybe 500 gram. So then I will say that yes, it is 100, it is 500. Similarly, the stimulus intensity and response varies in a logarithmic fashion. Logarithmic fashion. Here I have given a table. These are arbitrary approximations. Here the stimulus intensity is 1. It produces 5 discharges. Now I have increased the stimulus intensity. Say for example, it is 1 gram. This is 10 gram I made. When I made 10 gram, it will stimulate the 10. So the increase is only 2 times. Here it is 10 times. If you are looking at this, so from this unit to this unit, it's 2 time increase. From this to this, it's 2 increments. So that means this is 10 times here, whereas this is 2 times. Every 10 times, there is only 2 times. This type of a constancy, there is a constancy. This constancy is known as a Weber's law. Weber's law, he wanted to say that, he stated that there is a constancy in the stimulus and the response output. So this is the response and this thing, but this constancy, this constant factor, that means there is a 10 time increase. 10 time increase produces 2 times the increase. Delta is here 2 times. So this relation is a Weber. Now the Fechner further modified it because he did not see it in absolute terms. So that is why we got this Weber-Fechner law. Again, here I am just trying to bring in the same thing here. I have just put the numbers there. Here is a glass rod and you are pressurizing, no action potential. I have put a pressure here. So this pressure is about this millimeters of mercury. You should just say that it is about 60 millimeters of mercury. When you press, these are the number of discharges. So that means there are 7 there. So now the pressure is increased to about 100. You just see that number of units have been increased. You can just see 3, 6, maybe around 12. This is 6 or 7 and 12 here 2 times. So now the pressure is increased here to 140 or something like that. You get maybe somewhere around another thing, maybe 4, 12, 24 or something like that. 24, you can just sit and count them. So now when the pressure is increased further, so you just say that it's about 180 millimeters of mercury. That is the pressure here. And when you have got a great discharge, so this is 24, they may be 48 or 50 or something like that. So that means there is an increase in the intensity, stimulus intensity. This is the stimulus intensity, and the frequency of discharge is this relation is a Weber-Fechner's law. Weber-Fechner's law. The intensity response relationship is given by Weber-Fechner law. Weber mentioned the constant relation I mentioned. The constant relation is every 10 time increase produces a 2. So that means a constant relation with the stimulus detection levels, that delta S. And Fechner added other relations. Weber and Fechner's law states that subjective sensation is proportional to the logarithm of the stimulus intensity. The subjective sensation is proportional to the logarithm of the stimulus intensity. Further, it is detected that this response R is equal to the constant K, and this is the stimulus intensity to the power A. So R is a response, K is the constant, and the A is a constant, and S is the stimulus. So R is equal to K S power A raised to A. So that means this is the thing finally the Weber and the Fechner they gave us. So that means the response is proportional to this thing with the power function and with a constant. Now this is what they have. This one I have taken it from Genong. You can just see that the response is equal to 9.4 times S. S is the stimulus, and the power is 0.52. So this is the stimulus here. This is a percentage of maximum. The maximum here with 100%. So this is as you are decreasing, the number of response is also decreasing. So that's what they say, and they have put it in a double log. These things. This is a log of stimulus and the log of response. You get this linear line there, and this is what they have finally found out. This equation of this line. This R is equal to 9.4 times the S raised to 0.52. So this is approximation here. R is equal to Ks raised to A. So that is a Weber-Fechner law, and I do not want to go detail with the Weber-Fechner's law and these derivations. Response duration. The response duration, this one I have already shown these diagrams. Maybe I will again tell. The number of discharges decline over a time period when the stimulus continue to remain. Suppose here is the stimulus. If it remains in this A, what happens? The number of action potentials are same. So that means it's a non-adapting, no adaptation. The generator potential is like this. It has reached this thing, and a number of discharges are more. And here is another receptor in which the stimulus is almost same. The stimulus is here starting and it is off. So when you have stimulated, there is an increase and there is a decline in the discharge. And if you see the generator potential, what happens? Generator potential is maximum here, and it is also decaying in relation to time. As it is coming down here, it is less. So these are tonic or slowly adapting tonic receptors. So then we have another set, number C here. So where this at the level of the onset of the stimulation, you have the discharge. Slowly they become less sparse and disappear. This is rapidly adapting or phasic receptors. So the non-adaptive receptors, this one, the tonic receptors, this one, and the phasic receptors, I explained each one of them. Now coming back here, so this is the duration response. Now I want to show you the graph here. So these are some of the receptors, Pacinian air corpus. So this is Pacinian air corpus. You look at that. It is in seconds, it is getting the number of impulses decreases rapidly, very rapidly adapting. The hair follicle, it takes about 1 second. It's less than a second, maybe 0.1 second. So it is 1 second hair follicle or hair receptor. So this is hair receptor. So it is adapted so slow, so fast. Then muscle spindle, you just see that muscle spindle taking longer time. See, for example, the discharges, it may be taking about 3 seconds to decline, and it remains. It does not abolish. Here it touches 0 here. It does not touch 0 there. And if you are taking about the joint capsule, again, it decays slowly, but remains at a higher level even after 8 seconds. In case of the baroreceptors and the pain receptors, it would remain straight line. So receptors thus can be classified as a rapidly adapting, slowly adapting, and non-adapting receptors. The adaptation, now, how this adaptation is brought about? So that is the main concern to us. So adaptation is brought by the connective tissue surrounding the receptor. Connective tissue surrounding the receptor is viscoelastic, and when we are putting a pressure, this will be deformed, and this deformity, whichever is produced, is the physical thing on the core, so that will be diminished. So that is why there is a adaptation. There is another phenomena, what is called accommodation of the receptor. So that receptor ceases to produce action potential. What happens? What happens here? See, for example, this is a rapid adaptation. Now, even if the stimulus is on here, and it is not producing action potential. So that means that is accommodation. accommodation. Say for example, I am putting on the dress. When I put on the dress, these touch receptors are activated, tactile receptors are activated, and as long as I'm wearing the dress, it does not. I don't feel the shirt. So that is what is the accommodation. The receptors are accommodated, they do not produce the, so if they start producing, you will not be able to wear the shirt on, or you will not be able to hold on to it. So examples are shown here, and the baroreceptors I mentioned. Now move on to the summary. Sensory receptors are specialized part of the nerve that detect the external or internal stimulus, that not only detects, that transduce, codify, encodes, and transmits. For a given sensation, receptors exhibit specificity and a defined area in the cerebral cortex. The impulses are generated in a graded way by a generator potential, which has a temporal and a spatial decay. And if the generator or receptor potential determines, that determines the threshold and coding pattern for the particular sensation. Each sensory nerve fiber supplies set of receptors called a sensory unit. Sensory unit means one nerve fiber and the receptor supplied by it, which have a receptive area. This forms the basis of the acuity or 2-point discrimination. The receptive area, along with the central processing units, produce a lateral inhibition to project to the impulse in a focused manner. The sensory coding is done by the frequency modulation and also the temporal and the spatial discharge pattern, besides other parameters, because they labeled lines and all other aspects. The intensity of the response relationship is determined by the Weber-Fechner's law. Thus, in this chapter, we have dealt with the Mueller's law, Bell-Magendie law, Weber-Fechner's law, labeled line, sensory unit, generator potential, 2-point discrimination, coding of the sensory signal, the adaptation, hyperalgesia, allodynia. Okay, so now what assignment I gave, already I mentioned all those things, the keywords I mentioned. That means you write a note on, at least make 5 points for each of them. Mueller's law, the Bell-Magendie law, Weber-Fechner's law. These are very, very frequently asked questions. 2-point discrimination, the coding, adaptation, hyperalgesia, lateral inhibition, sensory unit, receptor potential or generator potential, and differences between generator potential and action potential. You try to look at that. Each one of them are important. So also write an essay type question. Define sensory receptor, classify the receptors according to the nature of stimulus. Okay, give the classification, give an account on various properties of the receptors. Hope this I just completed it. I think it will be, you will be able to revise it. Okay, these are the books, the Candles, the Guyton, the Genong, and the Samson Wrights. Next class we do with the pathways and processing of the post-recurrent sensations. Thank you.